A loathsome, obnoxious, repellent individual.
It's infuriating, that's what it is. It's infuriating to see the way, you know, when you saw Jack Straw talk about it, he's talking about them like they're statistics. The biggest victims of Islam are Muslims. Muslims are people, and the left can't get their head around this. Muslims are people. If you hate people, that's bad. Islam is an idea. Every idea is there for scrutiny and criticism and mockery if you want. And I spoke to her about my town. I spoke to her about Qadir Basque. I spoke to her about Luton Islamic Centre. I warned her and I begged her. On the racist point, there's no evidence that I'm a racist. In fact, all of the evidence, every single bit of evidence for the last 10 years points to the complete opposite. To prevent you. So I breached my bail condition one time. I turned up dressed as a Jewish rabbi and I got a conviction for that. That's one conviction.
You turned up as a Jewish rabbi as a disguise?
Oh yeah, you've got to see the video. I told the police, so I liaised with the police for the demonstration in Tower Hamlets. I was banned from going and I said to the police officer, we've got a Jewish rabbi coming to the demonstration, he's going to need an escort in. And they said, okay, and I'm banned from going. And I said, okay, he'll meet...
Hold on a minute, hold on a second. You disguised yourself as a Jewish rabbi, so you get a police escort in?
Yep.
Is very urgent business, ladies and gentlemen, I beseech you. Resist it while you still can, and before the right to complain is taken away from you, which will be the next thing. You will be told you can't complain because you're Islamophobic. The term is already being introduced into the culture as if it was an accusation of race hatred, for example, or bigotry, whereas it's only the objection to the preachings of a very extreme and absolutist religion. Watch out for these symptoms. They are not just symptoms of surrender, very often ecumenically offered to you by men of God in other robes, Christian and Jewish and smarmy ecumenical. These are the ones who hold open the gates for the barbarians. The barbarians never take a city till someone holds the gates open for them. And it's your own preachers who will do it for you, and your own multicultural authorities who will do it for you. Resist it while you can.
Seven years after shelving a potentially explosive story, journalist Andrew Norfolk found his conscience calling him.
As the years went by, I had this very uncomfortable feeling like I hadn't done my job. I was on a long weekend. I was driving up to Scotland. I had the radio on. A news item came on the BBC.
Greater Manchester Police have been describing how a 14-year-old girl was forced to endure an absolutely horrifying ordeal after being forced into prostitution. The vulnerable teenager was targeted with vodka and cigarettes after she was spotted wandering the streets before she was made to have sex with a string of men.
At no stage in the report had the names of the defendants been read out. I'm sitting in my car in the middle of nowhere, and I'm thinking, you've not heard a word about this case until 5 minutes ago. And yet, with every fibre of my being, I bet I do know something about those men, because I bet when I check it out, they're going to be Muslim names.
As Andrew set to work, demonstrations were sweeping across the country, led by the emerging face of the far right, the English Defence League. Its members were young, organised and growing in numbers, and its marches often descended into violence.
Gas grenades were thrown, police vehicles were vandalised, and the police themselves were attacked.
The EDL's goal was to stem the growth of a faith that it believed was corrupting the country. And in the grooming of white children, they saw not just a crime, but evidence of a broader Islamic agenda.
Militant Muslim gangs taking liberties in our towns and cities, taking liberties with non-Muslim youth, non-Muslim girls, raping, pimping, beating, abusing our whole system.
Paragraph 5.3 of the report says that in 2008, an 11-year-old girl came to the attention of the police after she disclosed that she and another child had been sexually abused by a group of adult males. Just a few weeks later, she was found in a derelict house with another child and a number of adult males. Yet she was arrested, 11 years of age, she was arrested for being drunk and disorderly, and none of the males were arrested. Has your force identified the police officers involved in that and found out what went on?
I don't know.
Okay.
Don't know.
All right. In paragraph 5.21...
Sorry, will you find out?
We will. Apologies,
and come and tell us next week. We can't have a don't know on these issues.
Correct. I will have an answer to that question next week.
Paragraph 5.21 shows how a police officer dismissed the case of a 12-year-old girl who'd been having sex with up to 5 Asian males because he said she had been, quote, 100% consensual in every incident. 12 years of age? I think that's unbelievable, to be honest. Have you identified who that officer was and found out what happened there?
Can I just make one thing clear? That I've said today that we must have an independent investigation team to come back at this. I have also personally spoken to the Director of Investigations at the IPCC.
Sorry, Mr. Austin, could the Chief Constable just finish? Please finish.
I've also personally spoken to the Director of Investigations at the IPCC, and in order to involve them in this as well.
Well, if people I was responsible for managing, if a report landed on my desk well over a week ago now, saying that people I was responsible for had behaved like that, I'd want to know pretty quickly what on earth had happened. In paragraph 5.9, it says that fathers had tracked down their daughters and tried to remove them from houses where they were being abused, only to find themselves arrested when police were called to the scene. Do you know what happened in that case?
Chair, I don't seek to defend any of this.
That is a remarkable answer from the man in charge of the police force. A police force where in one small town in the UK, over 1,400 children were sexually abused by mainly Muslim gangs. Note that the politicians on the committee here are complicit in some of the political correctness on this matter by calling these gangs who raped 1,400 plus girls in Rotherham Asians, rather than actually clarify it and reduce it down to the truth, because 90% of the convictions are for Muslims, not Asians. And it really is an insult to Asians as a whole to not distinguish. But even today, in 2018, government officials stick to the word Asian. And of course, fathers were arrested trying to stop their daughters being raped. The daughters were left to be raped, and even social services in Rotherham delivered children back to the rapists. That is how bad the situation was.
Mr. Speaker, Professor Alexis Jay's report into child sexual exploitation in Rotherham between 1997 and 2013 is a terrible account of the appalling failures by Rotherham Council and by the police and other agencies to protect vulnerable children. It was a complete dereliction of duty. It makes for shocking reading. 1,400 children, on a conservative estimate, sexually exploited, raped by multiple perpetrators, trafficked to other towns and cities, abducted, beaten, intimidated. Like the rest of this House, I was appalled to read about these victims and the horrific experiences to which they were subjected.
Misconduct has yet been found relating to the child sexual exploitation cases in Rotherham, according to the police watchdog.
To the grooming that's going on with gangs, it does predominantly tend to be Pakistani men, and that makes us uncomfortable because we don't want to be seen as racist. But actually, it's not racist, it's just calling out a perpetrator and identifying a characteristic.
England has their own problems with Muslims up in northern England raping little white girls. They don't want to talk about that.
Oh, come on, Ryan. Come on, Ryan. Actually, no, that's not true. As you know, that's not true.
Pakistanis do not rape white girls in Rotherham, England.
I'm not even going to engage in this conversation, Ryan. It's really beneath me and beneath you as well.
Brilliant. Yeah, great. Yeah, because we're trying to get past the media bias on organisations like this. The minute they open their mouth, none of these people listen to that anyway. We have BBC News here. The only reason why we have to come is because of how bad they are. When you describe this crowd, how are you going to describe them in your news report?
Well, we're going to call them what you've labelled yourself, which is an anti-extremist movement.
When your news report comes out on this,
yes,
will you mention the word far right?
If people have labelled it as such, then we have to reflect that.
No, you should report and reflect what you've met and seen today. Have you seen far-right demonstrators?
But if people label it as such,
if I label you as a nonce, would you report that you're a nonce? There's no truth in this, is there? What you do is word association, which is what all of your media do against ordinary people. These are all ordinary people who have come out to demonstrate. You will do word association of racism, of far right. You've got ordinary people out demonstrating against terrorism, and you, every time the mainstream media, you brand them, and it's not fair, it's not right, and you know that because you're on this demonstration. So
equally, I'm sure you know where those labels come from. You have, calls for tighter immigration. That is a right-wing rhetoric.
So calls for tighter immigration against Islamic terrorism is a right-wing rhetoric. In fact, the Labour Party said talk about immigration, tighter controls on immigration. Everyone does.
Right.
What do you mean a right-wing rhetoric? How's that a right-wing rhetoric?
Well, people would say that is
so because this group talks about terrorism and talks about controlling borders, that means they're far right.
It's a far right. Yeah, they could be.
This is what you're up against. This is what you're up against. This is BBC. So if someone identifies as wanting to stop Islamic terrorism and controlling your borders, it's far right.
It would be labelled as such.
By people like you!
But if my opinion is absolutely invalid, it's about getting...
You're reporting for the BBC, you're lying for the BBC, you are officially fake news and you're demonising so many innocent people. Right. You make it impossible for people to talk. You do that. That's who you are. You're here to try and get bad footage, that's why you're here. Right. That's your agenda. You have an agenda.
You're frustrated with the media, from what I take from this.
You have a complete agenda when you come to these demonstrations. And you usually don't even report. If you can't get any bad footage of today, if you can't get violence, you don't report.
Do you think there would be violence today? I mean, it's been peaceful so far.
No, not unless far left demonstrators are allowed to get up and throw things at people, which is what usually happens. So if the police want to stitch the organisation up, which we'll see time and time again, then we'll see. But you are all part of the problem.
In September 2016, a Muslim sergeant called Javaria Saeed actually became a whistleblower for the allowance of extremist Islamist ideology within the London Metropolitan Police. She was, of course, stonewalled at every avenue until she felt she had to become a whistleblower to the press to let people know what was happening.
Well, to start off with, the first day that I joined the unit, I was told by an officer to get down on my knees and beg God for forgiveness for the way that I choose to make my decisions as a Muslim woman. And then later on, there were comments around FGM, advised to other police officers that FGM is a clean and honourable practice in Islam and we should be careful not to criminalise it.
This was a unit set up to presumably engage with people within the Muslim communities within London and also to protect Muslim women from being victims of FGM and also of domestic violence.
That's right. The unit was very...
Now imagine growing up in that environment. Imagine growing up in an environment where relatives are raped. Imagine growing up in an environment where friends are killed. Imagine growing up in that tough world. Well, one person did, and he goes by the name of Tommy Robinson. And for being a whistleblower, the state was to turn on him.
They're now planning a rally in London on the 9th of December where Robinson and Batten will speak. It's a march through Westminster. I know what will happen. It'll be full of skinheads and people with tattooed to the eyeballs. They'll all be drunk before they get there. There'll be punch-ups and God knows what.
Why are you here? Why am I here? Primarily to support Brexit, to stop the EU army, to start off, and also in my capacity as a forces veteran, to highlight the sufferance that the homeless veterans are under.
Jessica, why are you here?
To protect us for our country and for our future generation.
I know it's a stupid question, but why are you here?
We're here today to fight for democracy, for the 17.4 million people that cast their vote for a democratic vote to get out of the EU. Not everyone can be here today, a lot of them are disabled or working, so we're here to represent the 17.4 million.
When we were filming, we asked the police at the beginning, during and at the end of the march, and all of them told us that there was no issues, no problem whatsoever, but they were expecting a lot of trouble in the opposition march, the Antifa, Trade Union and Labour Momentum March.
Into the establishment.
Tommy, we want you dead! Tommy, we want you dead! Tommy, we want you dead!
Over 15,000 people marched against Tommy Robinson and his fascists. Only 3,000, some are saying only 1,500, marched for Tommy Robinson, that convicted fraudster and thug and his fascists. A total and utter humiliation for Tommy Robinson and his band of fascists. They didn't mobilise barely any people on the streets of this capital, despite all their resources, all the money being ploughed in from the US and elsewhere. This is a historic day. They came out in tiny, derisory numbers, whilst we, those who oppose the scapegoating of migrants and refugees and Muslims, for all the injustices caused by the people at the top of society in this broken system that has to go, we have out-mobilised by a massive, massive margin. A humiliation for Tommy Robinson and a humiliation for fascism and a victory for those standing against racism and fascism.
That is important for so many reasons. One of the reasons, I think, is that we are demonstrating in far, far, far bigger numbers that we're right and they're wrong. There's a derisory number of fascists around the corner. I hope they've had a really bad day. They've clearly had a really bad day.
In order to film some sequences for this documentary, we attended the Brexit Betrayal March. And frankly, we were shocked, absolutely shocked, by the coverage of the mainstream media and the lies and distortion that they gave to the event. We are also shocked by the behaviour of the Antifa, the trade unions and the Labour Party and Momentum in relation to the march that tried to stop you speaking. Are you used to this now?
10 years I've had of this. I thought the media there were there to report the news. I always thought journalists were there to report the news. It was only after years of activism I realised that was completely the complete opposite. They're there to paint a narrative and give people through an agenda and show the narrative they want. Now, the only good thing is with the power of social media, that people get to see the other side of the story. We always try and show the other side of the story ourselves. So anyone who sees that, for example, outside my court case at the Old Bailey, the media reported 250, 350 people. Anyone who watches one of our videos saw thousands there. So then they straight away question, why are the media lying? Why are they lying and what else are they lying about? But for you, come in for your first time, I understand how confusing it is. But to anyone who's been involved in these movements, we've watched the media lie for years.
Claim. The media downsized the crowd outside Tommy Robinson's trial in 2018. Fact. The mainstream media colluded together inside the court to downsize the size of the crowd, but forgot that there was an overseas reporter there amongst them.
Hello everyone, hello London. My name is Andrew Lawton. I am from London, Ontario in Canada. So I was in the courtroom in the front row waiting to cover Tommy Robinson. The mainstream media did not know who I was, being the undocumented foreigner in this land. And they were speaking a little candidly. Would you like to hear what they said? You see, one of the great members of the law enforcement who have done a lot of great work today said to them, At the time, there were about 1,500 people. They said, let's just say a few hundred, quote, because we don't want to give it credit.
So there we have the mainstream media colluding together to do nothing more or less than deceive you. Now, in order to understand the real Tommy Robinson, let's go right back to his childhood. Tommy, when were you born and where were you born?
I was born in 1982, born in the L&D, that's the Luton and Dunstable Hospital.
Who we know today as Tommy Robinson was born as Stephen Yaxley, but his father left him at the age of 2. And his stepfather had the name Lennon. And this is who Tommy regards as his real father, the father who looked after him and nurtured him. And so he adopted the name Stephen Yaxley Lennon. He grew up in a closely knit working class community in Luton, one of the poorest towns in the UK. We know him today as Tommy Robinson because when he formed the EDL, he decided to protect his family by using a pseudonym. Tell us about your early childhood and maybe how your early childhood has in some way influenced the man you are today.
I'll say your life experiences. I hear so many people telling me. I had a debate with an expert on multiculturalism. I asked him where he was. He was sitting in Brussels. I asked him where he was from. He said Exeter. I said, you're the expert on multiculturalism, you're from Exeter. Exeter is 99.9% white Christian English. I'm from Luton Town. When I was born in 1982, there was 1 mosque. There's now 35. I've seen and watched the change my entire life. I've grown up. Luton is one of the most diverse towns in Europe. We have everybody, every culture. We have some, like the people I love, the people I've been brought up with, the people I associate or call my family. My friends are my family. St. Lucian, Jamaican, Italian, Bulgarian. My mother was an Irish immigrant. Luton is a town of immigrants, that's what it is. And through growing up in that town, you get to understand multiculturalism. You understand that. And I actually myself, and a lot of people don't understand this when I say it, when I hear world leaders, when I heard David Cameron say multiculturalism's failed, when I heard Angela Merkel say multiculturalism's failed, to me that is a weak way of accepting Islam's failed. Because growing up in Luton, all those cultures, all those other ethnicities, they've all gone like that together. They're all my friends, they're all my family.
But people call you a racist, and you're now telling me you've got black friends, brown friends?
I've never understood racism. I've never understood it. And I've never seen it. There's never been racial tensions in my town. And that's because growing up, I grew up, and the men I aspired to, the men I looked up to, whether through the football culture, the football hooligan scene in Luton, as a youngster, and that come about because a lot of my older relatives, my mum's one of 9 children, and a lot of my older relatives and cousins and uncles were involved in the football scene, and the people I looked up to were West Indians, Yardies, because Luton's football element has always been completely multicultural, and always clashed with the far right, because back in the 1980s, certain hooligan elements were far right, and Luton would always be a big day out for them. For the racists coming to Luton. So Luton's always battled racism. The men of Luton, the English, the white men, have always battled racism. So for me to be called a racist, amongst my friends, we laugh about it. Amongst my friends. Because even yesterday, even last night, Luton were playing at home. I've got a friend who's English, but his family have come from Jamaica. He's a massive 6'5" lad, and he's walking in front of my car as I'm coming into the stadium. And I spoke to him, and I'm bibbing, and he shouted, "Oh God, you racist!" But he's turned around, and we're both laughing our heads off. And so amongst all my pals, we joke about it. It's a joke in Luton because everyone in Luton knows me. Everyone knows me as a youngster.
Then tell me, how do you feel when people call you a racist?
It's insulting. It's infuriating, actually. It's infuriating because, and in fact, trying to understand it. And when I first started the United People of Luton, I was asked for my first interview. And I didn't know anything about right-wing, left-wing politics. I didn't understand certain media. I didn't understand The Guardian was left-wing, the Daily Mail was right-wing. I never understood any of that. I never read any of them. I didn't care. I was on a building site. I was not bothered or interested at all. And I went for my first interview with The Guardian. And I sat down and I went with my friend who I saw last night. I went with 3 of my friends who were all black. And I sat down and I had this conversation and we sat there chatting, saying, just telling them why we're angry. And then when the article came out, there's no mention of the fact I turned up with 3 of clearly my best friends who are not white. There was no mention. There was labelling of far right and racist. And the shock at that moment, the shock when we first walked through our town in response to the soldiers coming under attack, in response, as a community, we come together and walk through our town with plenty of non-white friends. In fact, my friend Isaac lost his teeth that day by a police officer. So plenty of non-white people. We had signs that said National Front go to hell to let the far right know from the offset they're not welcome. And when I read the newspaper, racists. And to try and understand that as a young man, and then to witness it and the spread of it and the way that, do you know what it does? It infuriates me to the real victims of racism because it's an absolute insult to them. That attempting to discuss problems around an ideology can have you labelled and smeared as a racist by every celebrity or news presenter in this country. Yeah, it's infuriating.
Well, you're a friend of Tommy Robinson, and apparently he's a racist.
The word racist has been thrown around so much today in 2018. You know, I grew up as I grew up in an Orthodox Jewish family, and the word Nazi, for example, used to throw shivers down my spine. Today, if somebody tells me there's a Nazi in the pub, I feel like I've got to walk over and buy him a beer. Not because I like Nazis, but because the word, the term racist, Nazi, bigot is being thrown around. Tommy is the least racist person I know. He loves his country. And do you know what? If there were more people like Tommy in Britain, if there were more, I reckon we would be a society that would accept people, not judging them based on their skin colour as racism is. We would be judging each other based on our values. And that's what's important. Race has nothing to do with this.
I don't know, man. All these Tommy Robinson. There's all the racists over here. Look.
You know, we're not hooligans. We're just normal folk.
Yeah.
Just getting on.
Totally agree with you.
You know.
From the EDL onwards, Tommy Robinson is associated with all races and religions.
On the racist point, there's no evidence that I'm a racist. In fact, all of the evidence, every single bit of evidence for the last 10 years points to the complete opposite. From the burning of swastika flags to even people throwing my criminal convictions up at me. One of my criminal convictions is for knocking out a Nazi. I have challenged, in fact, I've done more to challenge Nazism in this country than any of these anti-racist left-wing activists. I have openly called it on with them in the same way I've called it on with extremist Islam, with radical jihadis. I've always said Islamism, Nazism are opposite sides of the same coin. They're identical problems. But one of them has been pretty much defeated. The other one is flourishing. So, yeah, all of the evidence throughout all of the years. And you know, the thing is, the media try and portray this racism thing. But anyone who follows my life, anyone over the years who's followed me, anyone who's now followed me, sees my life. They see the videos of my life, they see my friends. They see it's quite clearly visual that I have a multi-faith, a multi-ethnic, diverse friendship with many people. So it's clear to everyone I'm not racist. But with regards to Islam, growing up in Luton, when I went to high school, there was something different, very different. I thought it was because the groups were Pakistani. So in our school dinner hall, when you'd walk in the school dinner hall, and we had every culture and every race, you'd have the white kids sitting intermixed with the black kids, sitting intermixed with the Chinese kids, with any Hindu kids, or they'd all be just in the mix, just eating their dinner. In the corner, there'd be 4 or 5 tables of Pakistanis. And I always thought Pakistanis, that's just what I thought it was. And there was a natural aggression and hostility. And I witnessed the gang culture, the gang identity of if you mess with one, You might as well have just declared war with the whole tribe. And I witnessed the difference in where men or kids, Luton, so people understand, Luton got voted the roughest town in the UK. It's a real town with real problems, with extreme poverty, with a lot of violence, a lot of problems that are away from Islam. It has a lot of problems in that town. And so growing up in a town like that, at a school like that, there's a lot of trouble, there's a lot of violence. And it was only then that I experienced the gangs, the one-on-one fight, that was gone. There was multiple people attacking one person. And it was a learning curve, and I just always put it down to Pakistanis. I thought they're different. And I never really understood it. And it was only then, my wake-up call, my complete lightning moment, was the Beslam school massacre. I'd witnessed lots of problems in the town. Sexual exploitation of the young girls. I had a relative who was groomed. I had a boy who was my age, my uncle's friend was murdered in the town, Mark Sharp. They snapped the knife off in his head. A group of 5 again, not one, not 2, multiple men were armed with weapons over nothing, over a road, over giving a hand signal in a car. And this man was with his 10-year-old son at the time. His son was my age. So I'd seen all these problems from what was a Pakistani community. But then it was the Beslam school massacre. Do you remember the Beslam school massacre? The Beslam school massacre was where jihadis in Chechnya took over a school of children. And I remember watching it, trying to understand it. As parents come outside the school, they had the children for a couple of days. They massacred them. And the parents were outside the school listening as their children were being butchered. And I remember just watching it. And then I remember watching a video in a chicken shop in Luton. And that was my introduction to a jihadi called Saif al-Islam, Sword of Islam, his name is. He's now in jail for terrorism. In fact, he's the one who punched me through the car window, for anyone who's seen the video in Luton.
Oh, because I know what you like, bruv. You have about 100 you in a minute. You f***ing little chief.
And I watched him sitting in a chicken shop saying that an attack like that on a school in England would be justified. And then I remember just, what is this? Try to understand his mindset. Try to understand what is this way of thinking. And then I started looking, and I understood that then he was part of a group called Al-Mujahideen. 60% of the UK's terrorists in jail now are ex-members of this organisation. Their head office was in my town. It was in Biscuit Road, which is a road in Luton. Omar Bakri, Abu Hamza. I then started reading and learning that all of these notorious figures were based in Luton, were radicalising in Luton. I then read about the groups. I started seeing they're sending people to fight for the Taliban. They're recruiting in a big stall out in our town centre, outside Don Miller's. That was my understanding then. And then I tried to understand how someone from Luton can think and attack against children that I'd just witnessed play out. I'd seen the mothers, I'd seen the grief, I'd watched it. And I was probably, I can't remember, 19, 20 at that time. So that was my opening moment where I started looking and learning. And then when September 11th hit, when I went up to the local shops, we had Magnificent 19 posters put all over the shops where they were glorifying the 19 suicide bombers. We had a parade through the town. We had celebrations in the local college. Now these things spread around the town. We live in the town. As I said in my Oxford Union address, this is our town. This is where we live. And trying to understand with the issues in the community like that. I had a young lad who was from Oxford University, who got the best grade at Oxford University, who'd done a documentary with me. And when he comes to do a documentary with me, he come to our local pub and he met everyone. And he said, I've never had this. I said, what? He said, you all know each other. Every one of you, in every shop, in everywhere we walk, you're all shaking hands and you all know each other. He'd never had a community. Because this is where the out of touch problem comes with politicians and young children who are going to boarding schools. If a young girl is affected in our estate, it affects us all. If someone's violently attacked in a racist attack, it affects every one of us because we all know them. We know their mums, we know their sisters. Some children who are like, for example, this young lad, Tom, he has gone to a boarding school. He doesn't mix on the estate because he goes to a private school. He comes out of school and goes to a university. He goes to another town. He doesn't know anyone. He then gets a job in a city. He doesn't have the community we have. We have a community. And when you affect one of them, you affect them all. And so we're supposed to just, and I bring it back to Rotherham. If you've got 1,400 children who have been raped in Rotherham, each one of them has 4 family members. That's 10,000 people directly affected. You talk about multiculturalism, you talk about problems, you talk about hostility. That's 10,000 people just in that small area who are directly affected by Islamic grooming gangs. And you want to try and tell us all and dilute the problem. So in Luton, you will not come to my town and not meet one person that doesn't know someone that has not been directly affected by Islamic hostility in our town. And that was so my awakening moment was Beslam. I started learning, reading, researching. And that's what really frustrates me a lot, is when people argue with me or smear me or label me, slander me, without doing any research. I'm very versed. I'm more versed than any Muslims. I can debate this issue with anybody because I know it inside out. And and it's not just that I know it from reading and researching. I've lived it. So I'm not talking about what I read in a book. I can go back every time to a life experience that has been an awakening moment that has helped me to understand why Islam is different to all the other cultures and religions in our communities.
Tommy, who are the biggest victims of Islam?
The biggest victims of Islam are Muslims. The biggest victims. When I talk about freedom, I think that the freedom that we have in this country, everybody should be able to enjoy. Everybody who's born in Britain. Our forefathers sacrificed their lives to give us freedom. Yeah, many British people have freedom. Many non-Muslims have freedom. There's many Muslims who do not have freedom, who can't have freedom, who are oppressed, who aren't free, who are slaves, whether they be slaves to Allah or slaves to their own families. The problem with apostasy, the problem without any organisations or charitable groups or government funding or support to help these people who are isolated, who are targeted for leaving Islam, the punishment to leave Islam is death. And so many people who have left Islam know that around the world. But that same problem is here in Britain, with honour killings, with violence. And again, every time I can give you an example. I was at a shop in just outside of Luton, and I walked out of the shop and a young Asian girl came up to me and said, "Tommy, Robert, I've been waiting years to see you. Please, please, please come back to my house." Yeah. I was like, "What?" I said, "No, babe." I said, I'm not coming back to your house. What's the problem?" And I went back, in the end, I got talking to her, and I went back and met her partner at her house. She's hiding. She left Islam. She's been hiding 20 miles from where her family are for 10 years because she's scared they'll kill her. Everyone should have freedom in our country. And there's an ideology and a scripture being promoted by many imams across this country that apostates deserve death. So, yeah, Muslims are the victims. And again, the biggest thing for people to understand is, I don't talk about Muslims. I talk about Islam. For the sole reason that I see Muslims as victims, Muslims are people, and the left can't get their head around this. Muslims are people. If you hate people, that's bad. Islam is an idea. Every idea is there for scrutiny and criticism and mockery if you want. It's an idea. You're free to put fault with that idea. You're not free to promote hatred against people. So I don't talk about Muslims, I talk about Islam because of that. And many Muslims I think many of them are naive to the agenda of Islam. As I said, many Muslims I meet when I talk to them about Islam know very little about it. They know very little about Muhammad. They are just cultural Muslims, Muslims by name only, experiencing the freedom in this country without realising that Islam takes those freedoms that they enjoy so dearly.
Tommy, you clearly explained the difference that you see between Muslims and the ideology of Islam. But what was the trigger that actually got you into activism that got you to form the EDL?
The formation of the English Defence League, people need to understand there was so much before that. For example, the group I've spoke about, Al-Mujahideen, the terrorist organisation, they disrupted everything in our town. They recruited for jihadis in our town. We'd witnessed the decay of our town. I'd grown up and seen so many problems. And then we had a soldiers' homecoming parade. And the soldiers were returning from Afghanistan and they're given the freedom of the city. I think it was a Tuesday morning. It was a morning and it was not publicised at all. So there was nothing in the papers, no promotion of it. There was a young lad from the same estate as us who lost his legs. Another young lad who had died, and his mother and their families were there to pay respects for the returning soldiers. Now, when we went into town that morning, I knew something was wrong. I looked around and I saw police everywhere. And then I saw groups, dozens of women together in burqas. Dozens of women. And I started spotting the jihadis. I started spotting Saiful Islam and the groups which I've researched and I know everything about. And I thought, they're going to do something today. And I just knew they were going to do something. And then they attacked our soldiers. Now, what a lot of people don't see, they just see a small group of Muslims shouting, baby killers, butchers of Basra. They spat. A soldier who lost his life, his mother was there to pay her respects that day. They spat in her face. This is the point again I make of, that's our town. Luton is our town. It's a town we love. It's part of who we are. And every time anyone in this country hears the name of our town, it's to do with war or murder or bombings or terrorism all the time. That's what Luton becomes. So for us, I remember watching it that day, and it wasn't, what people don't realise, understand, is 364 Muslims were held and prevented from coming into Luton that day. 364. We got all the intel because my cousin Kev was arrested. We got all the intel. 364. 80% of them were not born in Britain. There would have been 500 plus Muslims in that, more than our armed forces, to attack our soldiers that day. The police prevented them at the motorways coming in, but they didn't prevent the Luton ones. So we had 100 Muslims spitting obscenities at our soldiers. And on that point, I'm completely against the war. But there are soldiers, they swear allegiance to the Queen and the elected government who choose their wars. Now, for us that day, I remember sitting down afterwards, I remember watching the way the police policed it. They didn't even look at the Muslims. In fact, they walked them. I watched them as they walked that group of vile, radical jihadis. It's the equivalent of walking Hitler's henchmen through our town hall. They walked them through our town hall and took them to the back. So as our armed forces walked past, they could spit and attack them. They were walked through to do it. And do you know why they were walked through? Because never, up until that point, after the formation of the English Defence League, had the Islamic community been told no for anything. There's videos you can watch online of thousands of them walking through, shouting, bomb, bomb, bomb Israel. And then also shouting about Muhammad killing the Jews. They're shouting slogans about murdering Jewish people. Thousands of them with big PA systems and balaclavas through my town. And I've had to watch that for years. So where they just have never said no to them, because they're so scared of them, that they let them do that to our soldiers in our town. And then I remember sitting down afterwards with Kevin Carroll, my cousin, and saying, if we let them do this, if we don't do anything about this, what's next? Look at the progression. They're now attacking our soldiers in the street. They're abusing their mothers with full cooperation and support to do so. What we also found out was that the police and the council knew prior to this full well that there was going to be an attack on our armed forces. In fact, every mosque in the town had been leafleted for a week before, inviting them to attack our armed forces. Now, yes, 50,000 Muslims did not come out and attack our armed forces, but they also done nothing to stop it. They knew that was going to happen. If we would have known that was going to happen that day, those jihadis would have never got near our armed forces. So after that, I said, if we don't stop this, if we don't make a noise about this, then what's next? A soldier's funeral? Will they turn up at his family's houses? And we've actually watched the progression from attacking our armed forces to setting fire to poppies, to beheading Lee Rigby. We've seen it with our own eyes. We've seen the path we've gone down. So that was the final moment. When they attacked our soldiers, we said enough's enough. We now need, and it was really, we set up an organisation called the United People of Luton. And it was for us to let the rest of the country know, and to let the Royal Anglians know, who we're proud of and who we love and who we are so proud of for protecting us and giving us our freedoms. We wanted them to know the people of Luton support you and love you and are grateful for the sacrifices you make when they're coming back, returning from war zones with friends and comrades who have gone. We want them to know the people of Luton appreciate that. Not the way it had been shown to the world. So then we organised a demonstration to show that, which was a calm demonstration where the police's reaction was to kettle us, to be hostile to us, to search us, to stop us. All the things they didn't do to those jihadis on that day. So then that very early on it became more about then the treatment, the unfair two-tier policing system that we live under in a town with an Islamic community. So then and it very quickly spread from this was a Luton issue, the United People of Luton. And then very quickly I began to realise that every town with an Islamic community, the non-Muslim community, were living under the same rules. Two-tier policing, two-tier funding, special treatment, hostility, rape, war, violence, all put on them, religiously motivated. That progressed into the English Defence League.
But didn't you meet the Home Secretary, Theresa May, who is now our Prime Minister, at that time?
Before we took to the streets in any way, we organised a petition and we asked our council to ban these jihadis from our town centre, to give them ASBOs. If two local young kids in our estate, at our shops, cause trouble, they will be taken to court and given an ASBO. They're not allowed to the shops and they're not allowed to hang around together. Well, here we have jihadis, men who are supporting foreign group combatants who are fighting and murdering our armed forces. We want them banned. Why should my mum, if I'm a resident of Luton, why should my mum, why should my daughter, why should any member of my family have to walk past these barbarians who are recruiting for war against us? Why? When we're at war with the IRA, would you let the Irish do that? No, you wouldn't. Why are these people getting a free pass? Because they hide under the banner of a religion. And so, yeah, we asked for a petition. We set up a petition. We asked them to be banned. And do you know what the police did? They come to our houses and they banned us. They gave us bail conditions for 3 months, banning us from our town centre. Which is why on our second demonstration, the balaclavas come out. That's why people see the pictures of the balaclavas, is because many of us, like myself, were banned and not allowed into the town centre. But we wanted it's our town centre and we've done nothing wrong, and we were just trying to stand up against an evil within our community, within our town. And even with the Home Secretary, what I did with the Home Secretary is I set up a meeting. It was Theresa May, our now Prime Minister. Well, hopefully by the time this goes out, she's gone. But I set up a meeting with one of her constituents, and then I turned up instead of him. And I bought a laptop, and I bought information. And I spoke to her about my town. I spoke to her about Kadir Bask. I spoke to her about Luton Islamic Centre. I warned her, and I begged her. And she said, my government have made it clear where we stand on Islamic extremism. I said, you don't understand. I'm living in a Labour town. And you can make your directive as a government. That does not filter down to my town. My council and my leaders of my town are in bed with them. And at this time, we had a programme called Luton in Harmony. The Luton in Harmony programme was to bring all of the town together. And one of the people at the head of this Luton in Harmony was a man called Kadir Bask, who I know, because I translated things on his website, I know he stands for murdering gays. I know he stands for oppressing women. I know that's a jihadi mosque. So I warned the Home Secretary, I tried to warn my town, I made leaflets. Years later, Khalid Massoud, who the recent Westminster Bridge attack, who was he employed by? Kadir Bask, the Stockholm bomber. Which mosque did he go to? Kadir Bask. Recently, the Times newspaper done an expose on who? Kadir Bask. Reportings from his mosque where he's calling for jihad and war against us. Kadir Bask. All the things I'd warned, and this is when it gets really worrying. This is when you're witnessing all of this. I had a friend who works for the government who was part of an anti-extremism education, which happens for all of our police forces. The police and council are having one together. Who's teaching the police and council about Islam and extremism? Qadir Bask. You cannot make it up. Do you know when you know this man's a jihadi? When you know who he is, and you're trying to warn everyone about him and his mosque, and your council and your government and your police are being educated by him. There's actually a picture of Qadir Bask holding a sign with the local police officer from Luton, and the sign says #stronger together or something like that. Stronger together with a man who's planning the complete takeover of our nation, who's promoting war. Do you know when the Times newspaper done their expose on him? The Times newspaper expose had him saying, prepare your wars ready, prepare your weapons ready to kill the non-Muslims. This is the local imam. And when you know all of this, you feel like you're hitting a brick wall. You're trying to warn everyone. You've gone to your council, you've gone to your police, you've gone to the Home Secretary. And no one's listened. Instead, they've all just called you a racist. But only years later, anyone who follows me, who's seen these warnings, and then sees it come into fruition, sees the Westminster Bridge attack, they go straight to his mosque. After the Westminster Bridge attack, I stood on Westminster Bridge, and I said, this attack will come from someone who was radicalised in prison, and it will be linked to Luton, Birmingham, and East London. They're the hotspots. The next day, the police raided Luton, Birmingham, and East London, and he was radicalised in prison. So again, it's if you're researching this, which I become obsessive in anything I do, I have not stopped reading, learning, listening, understanding, researching, even following. I followed it. I know every one of those jihadis. I probably know them better than the police. I know where they all are. I know the schools they take their kids to. Because I felt that's my job, and to protect myself, I need to know what's happening. But, yeah, so many problems, so little time.
Tommy Robinson said that the group was becoming increasingly right-wing, essentially, increasingly extremist, and that he felt he couldn't deal with all of the elements in it. As I was talking about Tommy Robinson, asking your questions about him, he came knocking on our door, and now he's sitting here in the studio with us. He's joined in the studio now by Qadir Bash from the Luton Islamic Centre, who we had as an arranged guest on this subject as well. So we've ended up having a bit of a Barney about all of this. And just before the news, Qadir, you said that in an ideal society there would be punishments for example, homosexuals. And Tommy Robinson had put the point to you that this is why he was concerned by your ideology, which is why he was anti-Islamic and anti-Islamisation, and put Luton Islamic Centre in that camp. Do you understand why Tommy Robinson might be concerned by Islamic ideology when, even though you say we don't want it in Britain, you do use phrases like in an ideal society and then come up with a statement like that?
Yeah, that's fair enough. He has every right to disagree and to criticise. For me, when I say ideal society, I mean an Islamic society, not a Western secular society where we live here at all.
But you are here.
I want to say every Muslim, moderate Muslim, holds his belief as well.
Well, ideally, would you?
Well, answer that though.
Okay,
answer that first.
Our local council, we're in Luton. Luton Borough Council have refused dialogue with me for 4.5 years, yet this man sitting next to me, whose ideal vision for this country would be homosexuals getting executed, it has a table at the seat with the council.
You did just stress.